From time immemorial, bar and bat mitzvah kids have dreaded having birthdays at this time of year because that means you'll have to interpret the words of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. Of course, Adam interpreted them beautifully. But kids often ask me in my office when we study the Torah portion, what does all the sacrifice and ritual and the blood and guts in this book of the Torah have to do with us today? I often reassure my students that Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, is the best book of the Torah. In fact, in many Jewish communities in Middle Ages, this was the first book that the young students would start to study. I think this is the best book to study because it's filled with nuggets of truth, and you need to pull them out to really dig in and to dig into the blood and guts, if you will, to find them. Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, calls us as a people to live in holiness, to love our neighbor as ourselves, to create a society built on Torah, built on avodah, built on worship, built on gimilut chasadim, acts of love and kindness. And so here is one of these nuggets that I was talking about from this week's Torah portion. We learn about the laws of the chatat, the sacrifice one brings to the altar for committing a sin through negligence or ignorance. The Torah tells us what to do if an individual sins unwittingly, if the high priest sins unwittingly, if the people sin unwittingly, and when the chieftain, which was often interpreted as the king, when the king of the people accidentally sins. So let's look at the verse about the high priest. If it is the anointed priest who has incurred guilt, so that the blame falls upon the people, he shall offer for the sin of which he is guilty a bull. We ask, when the high priest sins, why does blame fall upon the people, as the verse says? The late Israeli thinker Yeshayahu Lebovich interprets it this way, with more questions. And all the sources from the Talmud and on, and all the commentaries of the Torah, there are two different approaches to understanding this, and they can be expressed in a statement of the sages. Does the community, in other words, the social, cultural, and moral level of a certain population at a given time, does the community correspond to the ruler? In other words, is it the leadership which molds the nation? Or does the ruler correspond to the community? Is the leadership molded by the people? Or does this mean that every nation gets the rulers it deserves? Does the leader cause the people to sin, or do the people cause the leader to sin? I'll read the verse from the Torah portion again. If it is the priest who has incurred guilt so that blame falls upon the people, does the leader cause the people to sin, or do the people cause the leader to sin? So Lebovich continues, and we return to a problem which has tremendous social and political significance. Should one blame the corruption of a nation on its rulers, or is it that the nature of the leadership is such because the people are such? And there is a vast difference between the two. In the first case, we say that the situation can be remedied by a change of leadership. But one cannot change a nation, and therefore, in the second case, the remedy can only come about by people improving themselves. Wow. Some big questions, all from a verse about slaughtering a bull. And I don't think the Torah gives us an answer. It is both and not either or. Leaders sin, nations sin. Sometimes leaders lead people, sometimes the people lead the leaders. Back to our the verses about the chatat offering. The Torah states, if an individual sins, if the anointed priest sins, if the people sin, and then it says, when the chieftain sins. So our commentator Leibovich states, there is no doubt that the Nasi, the chieftain, the king, will sin. It is impossible to have a government. It is impossible to have ruling power where the ruler will not be involved in a sin. And that is the general way the Torah relates to every regime. It recognizes it and its authority. But in the words of a well-known Talmudic saying, respect it and suspect it. Respect it and suspect it. The Torah teaches us that we need government structures and officials, and we need to hold them to account. I bet a lot of you right now might know where I'm going. A lot of you heard that on Tuesday there was an election in Israel. Many of you might be very happy with the results, and many of you might be very dismayed. Israelis voted, and we as diaspora Jews have to respect the results. The results said that a plurality, not a majority, of Israelis do not see peace with the Palestinians as the number one issue. They are concerned with Israel's very real security threats. Benjamin Netanyahu's interpretation of the threat from Iran and radical forces in the region and his disagreement with the U.S. administration on how to handle them are the preferred method for much of the Israeli public. Democracy has spoken. We should respect that, but it does not mean that we will have to agree with every stance of the Israeli government. We, as Canadian Jews, should work with our leaders in Ottawa to support the State of Israel and to be its partner. And we should let our elected officials here in Canada know our own opinions. We respect government authority, and we suspect it. As Netanyahu works to create a governing coalition, we as diaspora Jews are its partner, but partners do not always have to agree. In the Torah, when you see a neighbor sin, act wrongly, you are obligated to call her out and to help her repair her ways. Zionism is held to be very dear by Canadian Jews, and so is democracy. And we do not think that Zionism and democracy are contradictions. So I'd like to read you a historical quote from a Zionist. If we are to have a Jewish majority in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, then first of all, we would create here a situation of total, absolute, and complete equal rights, with no expectations whether Jew, Arab, Armenian, or German. There is no difference before the law. All paths are open before him. Complete equal rights would be granted not only to citizens as individuals, but also to languages and nations. So were these words spoken by some leftist Zionist, maybe by Ben-Gurion? No. These were the words of Zev Jabotinsky, the spiritual founder of today's Likud party, the party that Netanyahu leads. I've read that he has a picture of Jabotinsky hanging in his office. When Netanyahu says things like, and this is quoting from Netanyahu, he said this on Monday, the rule of the right wing is in danger. Arab voters are advancing in large numbers toward voting places. What's translated here as advancing is a military term he used. Leftist organizations are bringing them in buses. Of course, we know that he said this on Monday to drum up votes for his own party, but he is not living up to the values of democratic Zionism as envisioned by his mentor, Zev Jabotinsky. I am very proud that both the Reform and Conservative movements have taken him to task. I would like to read the Reform movement's statement. And I'm going to read it in whole because I think it really sums up what I'm feeling. Today we join supporters of democracy around the world in marveling at the vibrancy of Israeli society and the openness of her electoral process. We stand ready to work with the Prime Minister, the leaders of the new government, and those in the opposition as well to ensure that Israel remains strong and secure and to advance the values of democracy, peace, and pluralism to which we are unshakably committed. While nothing can displace our celebration of democracy, we do have deep concerns about the result and about some campaign tactics. We are concerned because yesterday's triumph for democracy in Israel may have come at the expense of the Jewish and democratic values we hold dear. In a video message to his supporters, noting that Arab voters are advancing in droves, Prime Minister Netanyahu chose to use demographics as a wedge that threatens voter engagement. No public figure should lament fellow citizens exercising their right to vote freely, expressing themselves openly and peacefully in accordance with the values of a democracy. We are concerned about the approach a new government may take to working with Israel's Palestinian neighbors, and especially with the Prime Minister's 11th hour revocation of his professed support of a two-state solution. When the Prime Minister says that if he is elected, there will not be a Palestinian state, we are left to wonder what type of future he envisions. A non-democratic future in which a Jewish minority rules over a Palestinian majority, or a non-Jewish future in which democracy is preserved, but inevitably the Jewish character of the state will disappear. We recognize what a challenging moment this is, but we also know that a negotiated two-state solution remains the optimal way to resolve the conflict, the burden of which we must not let fall on future generations. We will work with all those who share our commitment to an Israel in which the government does not dictate religious practices and offers a pluralistic and open approach to religious expression. We urge the Prime Minister that when he forms a new governing coalition, it will be one that reflects openness and pluralistic values for all of Israel's citizens, a coalition that will not reflect discrimination of one religious denomination over another, a coalition that will reflect the democratic and pluralistic values expressly stated in Israel's Declaration of Independence, and I'm going to add, expressly stated by Jabotinsky, the founder of the right wing in Israel. Ironically, perhaps, back to the Reform Movement statement, one result of yesterday's election is that our role as North American Jews becomes even more important. There is significant work to be done in mending the bruised but still strong and still critical U.S.-Israel partnership. We are committed to finding creative and effective ways to be a bridge between the two governments. We encourage all of our members to exercise their democratic responsibility to influence and impact the Jewish state through voting in the elections of the World Zionist Congress, the Parliament of the Jewish people. I'll have to add a caveat. In Canada, we're not having elections to the World Zionist Congress, but we all know American Jews, and we can ask them to vote for ARTSA, the Association of Reformed Zionists of America. As we continue to work to prevent a nuclear Iran, the Israeli government will need more than ever to focus on restored relations with the United States. The threat Iran poses to Israel, to North American interests, and to global stability must remain at the top of our agenda. We also recognize the work ahead of us in reaching out to those, especially younger Jews, who are more critical of Israeli politics, especially when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. They will be especially concerned about yesterday's results, the other day's results. We will work to educate them, to train them, to support them as they develop what will surely be a distinctive and thoughtful pro-Israel sensibility. We remain united in our commitment to Israel's security and to the values that can make her the light unto the nations, as we have prayed for generations. These are the words from our Reformed Jewish leaders, You can agree or disagree with them. That's the pluralistic notion of Reform Judaism. But I feel they do express much of what I am feeling. I want to bring us back to the Torah portion. You might have noticed when the cantor lifted the Torah up in Hagbah, it might have been hard to see, but the first word of the Torah portion, Vayikra, the Aleph, the last letter of that word, is written smaller than the other letters. Every Torah, every scroll of Torah that you look everywhere in the world will have that Aleph, written by a scribe, written smaller. And our commentators say that has to do with humility. Our Torah portion says that God called out to Moses from inside the Ohel Moed, inside the tent of meeting. And we know from the Torah, we know from our tradition that Moses was the most humble person, that you need humility to hear this call from God. And I think humility is maybe the number one Jewish trait that we should all be striving for. In humility, if we offer criticisms of the Israeli government, we do it in humility, knowing that we do not live in Israel, we do not have to bear the sacrifice that Israelis make. But in humility, with love, we can still offer criticism. We also know that a leader of the Jewish people needs humility too. That like Moses, humility is what should drive our leaders, and as our Torah portion says, when the leader sins. Our leaders should have the humility to know when they sin and to repair their wrongs. Avinu Shebashamayim Sur Yisrael V'Goalo Barech et Medinat Yisrael. Our loving parent who's in heaven, the rock of Israel, bless the state of Israel. Shabbat Shalom.